me as okay. I would rather prefer, considering the scope, you should just say Américo Maluana, political scientist.
Okay, political scientist.
Political scientist. Yeah.
So is it, you know what, because is it Americo or because I saw now you pronounce it differently.
It's Américo. Américo.
Okay, yes, I was right.
Américo Maluana. So
Okay.
you know United States of America.
Yeah.
Just replace the A and put the O there.
No, got you.
Yeah. All
Okay,
right.
so start in 3, 2, 1. So welcome to, I would not call this an episode, but rather a conversation, a critical and important conversation that I will be having, as you can see on the screen, with Américo Maluana, who is a political scientist, analyst, and also a researcher who has particular expertise in democracy and governance. And I'm actually quite excited about this, mainly because of, I mean, if you just Google his name, type him up, you will see the kind of caliber that we are dealing with today. But as many of you would know, 2024 is dubbed as the election year. This year is the year that many African countries have either participated or gone through the elections or are set to go through the elections, with Mozambique being the country that is actually today. It's the first day, well, not first day, but it's the day of elections. And who else better to engage and speak with than someone who is from Mozambique and beyond that has got expertise on Mozambique and all things democracy governance related. So Miracle, similar to South Africa, in Mozambique, you have had the Frelimo Party who has been in power since independence, and for majority, or if not most, of Mozambicans, especially those from middle age to older, all they know is the Frelimo Party. Now, the conversation that I've picked up on and that is quite interesting right now is people are ready for change. And I've seen some commentary saying that there are those that you'd rather stick to what you know, and there are those that are ready for change. And it's quite interesting to see the different demographics that are ready for change and those that say that things are working, perhaps not at the pace that we want, but things are working, so we'd rather stick to what we know. I would like to get your insight on what differentiates these elections from the previous elections.
Thank you so much for having me in this very interesting conversation. And I'm really excited. And indeed, as you said, 2024 is a very important year for Africa. We have around 19 countries holding general elections, and Mozambique is one of these countries. And considering the Mozambique electoral cycle, I would rather say that although we are having the 2024 elections, this is part of any electoral cycle that started in 2023 with the local elections. So last year we had the local elections in Mozambique. And this year we are having the general, legislative, and provincial assembly elections. And what we see is that these elections are somehow taking place after a highly polarized and turbulent local elections that were held in 2023. And these levels of polarizations are somehow very likely to continue in these elections. And you were mentioning that there is a divide. Some people seem to be ready for change, but the other want to keep the things as they are. So this polarization somehow characterizes the Mozambique political landscape. Mozambique is holding elections since 1994. And in 1994, we had the first elections. In 1999, we had the second. And in 2020, in 2004, we have the third general election. So what we see in these first cycles of elections is that Mozambique had a two dominant party system. And these two dominant party system was a result of the peace agreements between Frelimo Party and Renamo that during the civil war was seen as a rebel movement. So in the first elections, there were high levels of political competition between Frelimo and Renamo, and it was seen even in the results at, for the presidential candidates and the seats in the assembly. But from, from 2009 up to now, we've seen that we no longer have a two-party system. We have a dominant party system, which means that Frelimo has consistently been winning all the elections, not only for the presidential for its presidential candidates, but it has also consolidated its power position in the parliament, having a majority that can even allow itself to change the constitution. So we are talking about a context in which Frelimo dominance tends to be consolidated in each electoral cycle. But the problem is the consolidation of Frelimo hegemony is not a synonym of the maturation of the democratic process, because there are many problems that arise from this process, and many analysts or analyzing the trends, if we analyze the different um, mechanisms that around the measurement of the quality of governance, we can note that Mozambique is increasingly becoming an authoritarian country. For several years, we were classified by the Economist Democracy Index as a hybrid regime. But now we are somehow losing the democratic values in our process, and it has been shaping the Mozambique political landscape. So it is increasingly becoming difficult. It is increasingly becoming difficult to challenge the power of the Frelimo party. This is what I can say in a nutshell as a way of starting this conversation.
Yeah. You raised a lot of
Are you
important.
still there?
Yes, I'm saying that you've raised like a lot of key points there, especially on the fact that, I mean, the question of, Africa is, I mean, there's been a large and wide embrace of democracy throughout Africa, especially post.
Hello. Well,
Hi, can you hear me?
seems like I had lost you for a while.
All right. Are you back? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I'm
All
back
right.
now. I'm back
No, I
now,
was
and I've a connection.
right. Right. I was saying that since 1990, and that period being dubbed as the third wave of democratization, because many developing countries, Africa in particular, were embracing, institutionalizing democracy rather. But the question of democracy versus the quality of democracy is a whole nother conversation. And we see now that that is where conversations are somewhat gravitating towards, that you may be a democracy on paper. However, in practice, and more importantly, from the perspectives of everyday citizens, do they experience democracy? Outside of, numbers and rankings, how do ordinary citizens experience democracy? Now, with that in mind, suppose I would like your insight in terms of, are Mozambicans ready for change? It's one thing to want change, and it's a whole nother conversation to go to the ballot box and vote for something that you have always known. Are Mozambicans ready for change?
Mm-hmm. Well, indeed, Mozambique is also part of the third wave of democratization. But what we see is that, okay, in this context, the country adopted a liberal constitution. So the country adopted liberal values, but the institutionalization of democracy remains the big challenge. This is to say that although the country is democratic, established by the constitution, the daily practice of governance have not been incorporated in the democratic spirit
Yeah.
that was expected. And I would even say that Mozambique citizens are still not enjoying the fruits of democracy at its full potential, because there are still repression, there are still challenges in the consolidation of the political competition. We still have a context in which there is an uneven playing field in the electoral process, with the ruling party having more resources than the opposition party, and the ruling party also relies on state resources. So this somehow creates sentiments in the citizens. And you were asking if Mozambicans are ready to change. I would say that Mozambican people are polarized. What we see is that there are some people, mainly young people, who did not witness the struggle for independence, who did not witness the civil war, that are somehow more prepared, or show themselves as more prepared for change. This is to say that the legitimacy of the struggle war and the legitimacy of the civil wars that is said that has brought democracy is no longer enough for young people. Young people nowadays are demanding for employment. Young people nowadays are demanding for better economic policies. Young people are demanding for better public services. So it is to say that young people nowadays are able or are prone to punish the incumbents who do not deliver. So it was difficult in the previous year due to the historical heritage, but now the historical heritage is challenged, and it can be seen from the experience of the local elections that Mozambique held last year in 2023.
Yeah.
There are municipalities that were seen as the stronghold of the ruling party, such as Maputo municipality and Matola municipality. But
Yeah.
the results of the elections in those municipalities were very problematic. Many people, mainly young people, are seen as having voted for opposition, and the results of the elections were highly contested by the opposition party, claiming that they won the elections.
Yeah.
And if you look at the profile of people from Maputo and people from Matola, you'll see that are mostly young people who are more educated, and consequently are more demanding, and are those people who suffer from the lack of transport, from the lack of housing policies, from the
Yeah.
lack of employment, and so on. So this is to say that we are witnessing a generational challenge that will somehow pose, or is already posing, a big threat to
Yeah.
the ruling party. Yes, so
That's
this
yeah.
is how we can see the landscape. I think that young people show themselves as more demanding and ready to punish those incumbents that do not deliver by bringing better policies or public services.
Yeah. You mentioned that, in the local elections, there were disputes on the election
Mhm.
results. Do you think that in approaching the general elections that the dissatisfaction, to what extent will that influence the approach, not only the approach, actually sentiments to the general elections? Do you think that the approach would be, what, last year we voted for something else, for an alternative, that did not happen, what's the point? Or do you think that it somewhat rejuvenated this push for change, that let's, even though we were not satisfied with the outcome, in the local elections, we're still going to continue to demand? How do you think that the outcome will shape these elections?
Okay. Well, one of the one of the results of the lack of trust, mainly in the electoral management bodies, when the citizens perceive them as not being able to fulfill their mandate of delivering free and fair elections, is that young people do not vote. So
Mm,
when the youth does not believe in the election management bodies, it somehow increases the level of people who do not vote. People
mm,
just say that nothing is gonna change. On the one hand, on the on the other hand, there is a significant segment of people that see the elections as the only alternative
mm,
for them to be heard. It's like during the 5 years, I did not benefit from public services. I did not benefit from inclusive policies. My
mm,
voice was not heard in governance. So now I have the chance or the opportunity to say something in the votes. And people or young people who think like this generally go to the polls, they vote. So this is to say that there are several elements that we have to take into consideration when analyzing youth participation. And indeed, youth somehow discontent with the status quo, and they want their voices to be heard in the polls. So in the recent years, we have seen the emergence of new political parties and new
mm,
political movements. The emergence of these political parties, political movements, and some civic movements show that at the end, the youth want to participate, but the
mm,
spaces for its participation are somehow limited. That's why we see the social media networks, so the social media platforms now,
mm,
as one of the alternatives that you have to talk. If you go to Facebook, you'll see people talking about elections. Today is the election day. People are there posting that they voted and so on. This is to say that people really want to participate.
yeah.
People really want to engage in the process. But um, in the Mozambique context, it is more emphasized the electoral participation, which
Mm,
starts and ends in the electoral
mm,
cycle, rather than the political participation, which entails the participation of young people during the government.
yeah.
This is to say that if a candidate wins, he somehow disconnects himself from the electorate and
Mm,
comes 5 years later to say that he wants to be voted again.
yeah.
So this
Yeah.
is somehow problematic and brings frustration to the voters.
Yeah. You raise a very important point there. And I think that, I mean, I'm going to speak from my African context now, that it seems to be a common trend in terms of, number one, not only in Africa, the general trend is that leaders on average are 4 times older than the average age in Africa. The median age within the continent is 19 years old, and presidents is around 70, which is about almost 4 times, the age. And you raised a very important point when you said that there's a disconnection that happens from the day of elections or when election results are announced and the next cycle of elections. And democracy happens in between elections. Elections is not the start and end of participation, nor is it the start and end of democracy. So I'm going to ask you a two-part question. Number one, stemming from what you're saying, there's a difference. I mean, it's a sign of a maturing democracy when there is, when elections become competitive and when there are viable opposition parties. And in the same breath, there is a difference between having opposition parties and having quality opposition parties. Where things currently stand, do you think that the opposition parties are viable alternatives? Do they actually speak into, the sentiments of Mozambicans? And then two, I would extend that question to also say that what needs to be done differently? What needs to be done differently, both from the ruling party and opposition parties post this period?
Mhm. Well, you are raising a very important question. It's like, okay, if we see that the things are not working with the ruling party, what is the alternative? In the Mozambique context, it's very difficult to talk about alternatives. I'm not saying that they do not exist, and they somehow depend on the perspective of each citizens. But in general, the Mozambique political system and the Mozambique party system shows that, and as I was mentioning in the beginning, that Frelimo is already a dominant party. It has won all the elections from 1994 up to now, and it's also consolidating its presence in the parliament. So during this cycle of elections, we have seen that although Frelimo strengthens its dominance by non-democratic means, such as by using the state apparatus to sustain itself as a political party, the opposition parties have also structural problems. Many opposition parties are actually fragmented. Are actually fragmented. If you see Renamo Party, for instance, you will note that it has, for a very long period, relied on the legacy of its charismatic leader, Afonso Dhlakama, who passed away in 2018. After the death of its historical leader, Renamo has not become the same party. Its leadership was contested in the context of the succession. There was a new, there is a new president, but he was immediately contested. And in the context of the demilitarization process, I think that you have followed Mozambique process, and you might have noticed that the first five during the first 6 elections, we have one armed party. And one of your question was about the difference between these elections and the previous elections. And one of the key differences is that for the first time, we are having elections without any armed political party. Renamo has no more guns as part of the demobilization, demilitarization, and reintegration process. So even in the context of this process that we call DDR, the leadership of Renamo was contested by that time. And recently, there was a very popular candidate who is running for president now. His name is Venancio Mondlane. Venancio Mondlane is seen as a charismatic politician in Mozambique, and he was running for Maputo municipality. He has he is very popular among young people. So after the local election in 2023, in which he ran as a member of Renamo, for this election, he wanted to be the presidential candidate of Renamo, but he was excluded from contesting the presidency for contesting to be the candidate, the presidential candidate. And as a result of this process, he left the party. So this has something to say about the fragmentation of the political parties that I was saying. Because when an influent member such as Venancio Mondlane leaves Renamo, it means that he takes with himself a considerable segment of the Renamo electorate, mainly the young people. So it is very problematic. And the process of selecting the candidates within the political party, in the ruling party and in the opposition party, shows that there are some internal dynamics that somehow disable those people who see themselves as able to lead the parties. And Venancio Mondlane, as I was mentioning, he became frustrated by the process and he joined a coalition to run for president. His coalition was excluded by the Electoral Commission, but he is now running as an independent candidate with the support from Podemos and a new political party, and is in the process. This is to say that although Frelimo has its strategies to remain in power, the opposition itself has its problems, its structural problems that reduces its power or possibilities to challenge the dominant power of Frelimo, making it very much difficult for them to have a stronger presence in the parliament, as well as to have one of their opposition candidates to become the president. So there are structural problems, and these problems somehow shape the ongoing landscape of Mozambique politics.
Yeah. And I suppose in me, closing off, what is the mood right now? What is the mood right now in Mozambique? I don't want to use specific languages to, mislead, but what is the mood right now?
Well, I would say that as this is the election day, so far the process seems to be smooth, although there are irregularities. There are some illicit acts that are being detected in different locations. There is not much violence so far, and considering that we are still in the process, it is still a little bit difficult to foresee what may happen after the announcement of the elections. Last year, after the announcement of the results, there were riots, there were demonstrations, and there was violence from the police, um, violence that resulted in lots of killings and so on. So this dark scenario is not very unlikely to happen, but it will somehow depend on the perception that citizens will have on the on the process itself. But let me not end this conversation without mentioning some of the key issues that the upcoming president or the president that will be elected will face for for the next 5 years. Mozambique is suffering since 2017 from violent extremist attacks. And these attacks are taking place in northern Mozambique, Cabo Delgado province, and have caused deaths and thousands of displaced people. Although there was a deployment from Rwanda troops and SADC troops, although they have already left, things were somehow stabilized, but seems like the conflict is far from end. So I see this as one of the key challenges to the next presidents. And one of the critics that has been raised is the lack of a coherent strategy to fight violent extremism. We may have a military component, which is important and necessary, but there is also a need of tackling the root causes of the conflict, which linked to poverty, exclusion, marginalization of the communities, and these violent extremist groups find a ground in which they can somehow instrumentalize these vulnerabilities to recruit the youth to be or to join the violent extremist group. On the other hand, we note that Cabo Delgado is a fragile province. Um, Before the violent extremism, it was seen as a drug trafficking route. So it was seen as a fertile ground for illicit economies. So it is important to tackle the root causes which are linked to the socio-economic situation of the population, but also the illicit markets that created an environment of vulnerability in Cabo Delgado, although many evidence show no relation between the illicit markets and violent extremist groups. It's still a variable to consider and fight so that there can be built resilience in Cabo Delgado. There is also the challenge of economic instability. Since 2016, as the result of the hidden debt scandal. The hidden debt scandal is the biggest corruption scandal in Mozambique, which consisted in contracting a $2.2 billion debt without um, without the intervention of the parliament by the government, which has led the main donors to suspend the budget support to Mozambique. So it was tragic because from 2016 up to now, the Mozambique economy has been shrinking, has been the levels of growth a level. Just imagine an economy that from 2000 and from early 2000 up to 2012 was growing an average of 7%. And in the recent years, it's growing around 2 or 3%. So we can imagine what it means for the poor and vulnerable people. Of course, there are some phenomena that we may not forget, such as natural disasters. We faced Cyclone Idai, we had Cyclone Kenneth, and we also had the impacts of the COVID-19 outbreak and so on. But in general, it seems like the government has failed to bring effective economic policies to revive the economy and create more employment. There was in 2022 what we called economic acceleration plan, but seems like the results are somehow modest. So economic instability is something that the next president will have to deal with, mainly considering the high levels of youth unemployment. What else should I mention? We also should link the violent extremism with the prospects of the LNG projects in Cabo Delgado. As a result of the violent extremist attacks, Total has suspended its operations. And nowadays, the hope or the prospects of Mozambique development rely on the exploration of the natural gas in Cabo Delgado. This is to say that if the problem of violence is not fixed, Mozambique will not be able to advance with the LNG projects and benefit from its revenues that are very necessary to the Mozambique people.
Yeah, Américo, thank you so much. I know that this is not going to be the last conversation that we are going to have, but I'm guaranteed that a lot of people may they be from Mozambique or anywhere else from around the world, will really have a solid and more concrete understanding on the elections, where Mozambique is right now. And if anything, what this also highlights is the importance of today's elections. Elections, yes, it's just a ballot, but one vote makes up millions, and millions makes up, it shapes the trajectory of the country. So we'll keep a close eye on Mozambique. And thank you so much for your time and for your insights. Really do appreciate it. And once again, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me in this very interesting conversation. It is always a pleasure to share some insights on Mozambique development or political landscape. Thank you so much.